I wanted to address a video I seen online on YouTube about there being a possible 2 or 3 Earth ages and more than one flood. And the video was basically done by someone very popular, and it was talking about another Earth age and another great flood. And I only know of one great flood. Of course, the flood where Noah and his family fleed or, waited in the ark and were saved, of course, because of faith, by faith. That's the only flood that I know of. I have read the Bible, I've researched, and if there's more information that I'm not seeing, I would like to know. But basically, when I read the Bible, especially when I read Genesis, and it's talking about Genesis, I'm talking about Genesis 1 and 11, specifically in Genesis 1 and 27. So in Genesis 1 and 11, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Genesis 2 and 7, I'll skip to that, and it says, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul. It seems the writer, whether it's Moses or John, I'm not sure, because one of them is said to be the author of Genesis. It seems the writer was recapping chapter 1 about man being created from dust and doing what he did, naming the animals that were made first, created before him. And then woman was created, him and the woman, man and woman was made. And then they were told to be fruitful and multiply. And this is all covered in chapter 1. It appears a lot of info is repeated throughout both chapters. And an example also would be Genesis 1 and 5. When it says, in every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. I believe the scriptures are letting us know this for a reason. I mean, those comments are made for a reason to let us know that man didn't have to plant before things grew. God gave everything already created whole. It was already done. And basically, I believe that's what he was saying by continue on in faith, be fruitful, multiply, continue on in what I have created. That was up to man, That was what man was supposed to do. He was given a task, a chore, given a way, a life. And of course, all that went south after the, encounter with, of course, Satan. And of course, there's many ways that that's played out. We don't know. We weren't there. We hear he was a snake in the ground, that the fruit was a fruit, an apple. But I don't know if it was. The Bible is literal and figuratively. And one thing means something else. That's why we're supposed to show ourselves approved and research and figure things out on our own, but by research, by searching. And that's the way to prove something. When you want to prove something, you investigate and you seek out all options, weigh evidence for a conclusion. That's almost scientific, but that's the way God meant us to do a lot of things to prove himself. Not that he just said it and it's done, but proof. He wants us to do that. We're intelligent beings that he made, and we're supposed to do that. And I believe that's the case with anyone who's talking about a flood, or one flood, 2 floods, however many. I read about the one great flood, and the purpose and the reason behind the flood. In the days of Noah, before the flood, there was a double curse pretty much resting on the earth in the consequence of Adam's transgression after the murder by Cain. But yet, nature hadn't changed. It was still beautiful. There were tokens of decay, of course, but not like it was after the flood, when it was just total decay and destruction, pretty much by water damage, which is all can scientifically be proven, because like the Bible was saying, everything that made is made of something that was. It's nothing is made out of nothing that wasn't already. And you can read that in the Bible. And I believe that that's pretty much how the Creator wanted us, to show ourselves approved, is to search and figure things out. And with this flood, there's one that I know of. And Noah obeyed. Noah was faithful. And Noah did what God said, to build the ark. And of course, there's speculation about what the ark was built out of. The word gopher wood, is mentioned in the Bible once, I believe. And when I look up what it was, what was the substance, of course, it's hard to find out information, because everything's a translation from Hebrew, Latin, Greek, and some letters didn't exist, like G and K did not exist. So was it gopher? Was it kofir? There's many translations. You can search everything in Google about what possibly gopher wood was, meaning maybe it was anything from a box-shaped tree to a resinous tree to a tall tree. Could be all of the above. We don't know. It's kind of a mystery, but that's part of having faith too. It could have been a very, very large, wide tree at the time, because things were different pre-flood. Man was different. Nature was different. Men were considered giants. And that word is mentioned in the Bible. Giants. Not Nephilim, where we see people talking, of course, in videos about Nephilim and some other Anukis, but whatever that means. But the word giant is mentioned in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And I take those words literally. Men of old, men of renown, meaning old, large, been on the planet a while. Men of renown could mean smart men, men of stature, of height, men that had power. All those words are related to ego, pride. And when there's mention of the Nephilim in Google, there's an etymology, and there's a bunch of people that have written about it. Brown Driver Briggs, Robert Baker, Girdlestone. I suppose they all have books, and you can look at the lexicon, and you can see where the word Nephilim could have been a verbal root Hebrew word meaning to fall. And it could have just had another meaning, because in English language, of course, we have to realize everything is translated from something else, and a lot can get lost in translation, a whole lot. That's why we always have to research and figure things out for ourselves. I don't always just listen, and now I don't always just listen and say, oh yeah, that's the definition because someone said. I want to research myself. I'm just naturally curious, always have been. That's why I'm doing this video with my own natural curiosity about a lot of things. And especially the Lord, our Savior, His true name. And when it's talking about Nephilim, the meaning to me seems to imply that it means fallen, fall, apostate. And maybe that translation could have got lost over centuries to mean something else. Men of renown, also, when I say meaning men that were smart, large in stature, ego, all those words can like point to pride, right? And there's the saying, pride goeth before a fall. When did that saying start? I'd have to do some more research on that. But saying that pride goes before a fall is to say that someone was proud and they got messed up and they fell, literally, figuratively and literally, fallen in their heart, falling in their, well, personality or their approach to things, just fallen in nature. Um, Maybe that's what that meant, because also around the time of the flood, men was quite prideful, and pretty much man had put God out of their knowledge and worshipped the creature, the man, worshipped each other, worshipped themselves, and more than they worshiped God or believed in God. God is jealous. He's a jealous God. And he wants us to put him first. And at that time, man was greatly full of himself. At that time, pretty much you could translate it into prideful, I would say. Wouldn't that be someone that was renowned of old, prideful, smart, probably very large people, very capable, very strong, even capable of building an ark because they were so large. They were larger than we are now in stature. Perhaps they could have hollowed out a tree, or maybe that's what it meant when it says to pitch within, to pitch without. That was something about resin, some glue like substance. And compartments were made. Maybe they didn't have to cut and build with nails. Maybe they hollowed out the ark. Um, who knows? The process had to be different because apparently it did float, without sinking. So that means it was without holes. But imagine that man was capable of doing that back then with the intelligence they had, with the strength they had. But at the same time, of course, they did put God out of their knowledge and worshiped the creature more and became, more smart in their own imagination. That we don't need God, we don't need him for anything. So of course everything else happened, the corruption, and which led to the building of the ark that Noah was spiritually led to build because God was telling him, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring destruction by water. And this is the only time that I'm reading about it happening. Of course, there are stories and legends which are always repeated, but I feel like a lot of time the basis of that, the stories are from the Bible. Like you can get stories about Jesus or a type of Jesus in all cultures, whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam. There's always this central figure, and it has a similar story to what Jesus done. Jesus being born of the Virgin Mary, the Immaculate Conception. God being his father, and doing the works that he did, the miracles, being crucified, rising the third day, ascending to heaven. And you can hear similar stories out throughout culture. It's endless. So maybe there is another story that's similar to the flood. There's been plenty of floods. We have flooding now, but when I talk about a great flood, when you can look at the evidence all around you, when you look at the mountains, when you look closely at rocks and sediment, when you're at the beach and you see really old rocks, I've picked them up, they just disintegrate in my hand. And water damages greatly. Unfortunately, if there's a body that's like underwater or something, how you see these shows and what happens to the body, and then imagine being underwater, anything that's underwater, plants, green, the foliage, rocks, sediment, sand, structures, mountains, dirt, anything that's underwater for a long time is going to have some type of damage. And long time meaning months, like when the flood happened and how long Noah was in the ark. I think it was supposed to be about 5 or 6 months altogether after the flood. And so water damage can happen. I mean, when you're talking about ultimate water damage, yes. And when you read and then translate about how it happened, when Noah, was led to go into the ark, and the animals were led to come, and then the people, of course, started to notice. Okay, well, what are these animals doing? These animals are going in the ark. What's making them go in the ark? Uh, they were led, of course, by the Spirit, I'm sure, by God. And then I didn't realize until I read that once Noah entered the ark, he was in there 7 days. And God is very symbolic the way he does things with numbers and days and things. And I didn't realize they were in the ark for like 7 days. And then about the eighth day, um, clouds began to appear. Because you have to remember, even in that day, there was no rain, according to the Bible. It didn't rain on the earth. There was a mist. We can call it condensation now, precipitation, that was in the air that watered the ground. However that concept works, it depends on what you're believing in these days, that we're flat earth, firmament covered by a dome. Of course, that means the condensation is going to stay in. But it hadn't rained on the earth, what we see as rain, like a rainstorm, water coming down from the sky. That had not happened. So when the clouds started to come, the darkness, the people, are like, something's happening. And this is on the eighth day. And eighth day man, they call Noah, maybe for this reason. I'm not sure. Um, and soon large drops of rain just water began to come down. We call it rain now. And the world hadn't witnessed anything like that. And of course, I'm sure the people were just fearful that something is happening. Wait a minute, was Noah right? And and we know that what happened was, according to the Bible, the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Well, I mean, when you translate that and when you do your own research, if you think about the great fountains, a fountain is something that shoots up, like old faithful, they call it, the geyser. And so the windows of heaven were opened, it says. So that means, okay, water's just pouring from the top. Water's coming up from the land and the bottom. The ground is breaking up. You can just imagine how that, wow, could have looked and how it could have felt. Earthquakes, the ground becoming, you just breaking up, just destruction. And water shooting up, rocks shooting up, things, I don't know, just chaos, the ground breaking up. That's what happened. The great fountains of the deep. I mean, just water coming up and breaking up the ground, and people probably being swallowed up. Jets of water bursting up with great force, throwing rocks into the air. How high? I don't know. coming down and creating canyons and crevices. How large were these rocks? Who knows? But it created destruction. It created the landscape that we see today when we see canyons, crevices, and just jagged mountains, jagged rocks, edges, our oceans. Before there were rivers and seas, but not really a massive ocean, and the land breaking up. Even when you look at maps of the entire earth, if you can look at any map, whether it's the flat earth map, the globe map, and if you just look at the land just in a circle, like you're looking down at just all land, it looks like a puzzle that has been broken up and that pieces can be pieced back together. There's certain places where you can just see, wow, that could just fit perfectly back together like a puzzle. And that tells me that the land was intact. The land was, it was landlocked. Pretty much there was just the land all together in one mass. And then it was broken up later, after creation. That's the way it looks, like a puzzle that could be fitted back together. And that could have happened during the flood, since the great deep did break up and the fountains of the great deep opened. That could possibly cause all that damage when you're researching, when you're hypothetically trying to figure out how all this played out. And of course, the earth was covered with water, and the ark pretty much floated up and floated until it came to rest on the highest point. Some say it's Mount Ararat. That was the highest point at the time. Definitely in that area. We know the Himalayas are there now, in that area, the highest point. Mount Everest, it's pretty much the highest point. So, I know of that flood. It makes sense to me how everything would happen and how the earth could have been covered by water and how the water receded and damage could have been done, and the damage we see today. That's the flood that I have read about. I just don't know of any other flood, of any other earth age. And when I heard the video about another earth age, I was thinking about Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 that I read about. When it seems as though that the Bible is talking about two different creations, when in fact it's talking about really one creation, but just in more detail, like saying, yes, man was created out of the dust of the ground, but then later on going back and mentioning details about how God did it. Not that it was done twice, but that it was just done once, but back and forth with details. It's kind of like the account of Jesus on earth in the New Testament, when there's several different, stories about him in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. They all have accounts. They're slightly different, but it's the same story. So you're hearing it more than once. That is showing evidence. And evidence is important when talking about the Bible. Evidence of internal consistency, evidence of history, of archaeology, of science, of relevance. It's all important to have evidence. And what better evidence is more than one person telling you that something happened. They didn't know each other really, but it's similar according to their accounts. Well, that helps you to more believe and not just, saying one person. And I believe the concept of having witnesses, two witnesses or witnesses in a trial is important, not just someone's word, but having more than one witness is good. I mean, it's even legal that you need witnesses to crimes, witnesses to something happening. I believe all that comes from the Bible, The Bible consists of 66 different books written by 37 different authors over a period of 1,500 years on 3 different continents. And it's probably the most controversial and volatile subject in all history is there a higher power? But to have 66 different books by 37 different authors over 1,500 years on three different continents saying basically the same thing is is greatly evidence of consistency to me, evidence of history. I mean, we can research scientifically some things about the Bible and about creation and nature, and it can be proven. God put it there. He put his stamp on it so that it can be proven. He wants us to prove him. Not just because he said it, he gives us a will. A will. We can make decisions. We can decide. I believe that's all for a purpose. Otherwise, we'd have puppets. So when I read about this flood, the Great Flood, this is the one that I know of. If there's another one, if I'm missing something, I sure would like to know or like to hear about it. Let's see. Basically, that's the point I wanted to try and go over. It was about the flood and about, general creation, about the one or two possible earth ages, or the two or three floods. I just wanted to address that issue because I honestly don't believe there was more earth ages and or more floods. We have to research and we have to look at time and how time is counted and who was doing the counting and who did the changing, because all that happened a lot in the early days of, with the captivity of the Israelites, and everything was always being changed and maneuvered. Calendars, clocks, ways of things being done. It's just all very important if you really want to know truth and understand. So that's why I just wanted to address this issue about the possible two earth ages and the possible other great floods that I had seen on YouTube. I hope you enjoy it. Share it, like it, subscribe. Thanks so much from In His Service. Have a great day.